everyone, real quick, if you're interested in booking private lessons with me, you can contact me through my website at breenmusiclessons.com, link in the description and the pinned comment. So that's the first chord progression that you hear in the Wes Montgomery song, While We're Young. And I wanted to highlight that as a quick little lesson of how you can disguise a 2-5-1 chord progression, which is generally a very common / cliche sound in jazz music. But if you're not used to this style of music, you might not even be aware that that's what you're hearing. But let's go through it and discuss how this is still a 2-5-1. This song is in D major. Let me show you what a very typical 2-5-1 chord progression would sound like in D major. So my 2 chords should be an E minor, which I'm turning into an E minor 7, as most jazz does. And then my 5 chord is an A dominant 7, pulling back to the tonic, which is a D major, which I also turn into a D major 7. Now let's once again listen to the intro for While We're Young. Now that you can hear the 2, A and B side by side, you can kind of hear there's similarities there. Let's look through what he does that actually changes it and makes it a little less obvious at first listen. The main thing is that when people see this first chord shape, they might think, oh, that looks like a major 7th shape off of the D string. So if you think that G is the root, it makes sense as a G major 7. Let's go through that really quick. So 5th fret on the D string, that would be G. Again, if I'm thinking of that as the tonal center for the chord, then it makes sense that this would be the 5th, this would be the major 7th, and last would be the major 3rd. But in the key of D major, that would actually be the 4 chord. So it doesn't really fall into that typical structure of a 2-5-1. But there's one important element about that that we kind of forget. He is hitting the open E string and letting it ring out as a drone note while that chord shape is being played. So you can think of the E as the tonal center. Let's see what happens when we do it that way. We have the E string. Now the G becomes the minor 3rd from the E's perspective. What was the 5th interval, D, is now the minor 7th interval from E's perspective. The F sharp is the 2nd interval from E's perspective, but since it's an octave higher, we would consider it a 9th. And the B is the 5th interval. If we put all this together, this now looks like an E minor 9. That fits into the structure of a 2-5-1 because in D major, any E minor chord would be the 2 chord. The minor 9 is simply adding another extension. When I gave you that basic form before, it was just an E minor 7. So all he's doing is he's giving you that extra interval on top. So with the addition of a 7th, also a 9th. There's also a little bit of misdirection as well in the beginning because he hits the B by itself and the E by itself. But remember, those are simply still chord tones of the 2 chord. It is the 5th interval followed by the root note. So there's a little bit of arpeggiation happening before he hits the full E minor 9. Now next up, this is a little trickier. He does 2 diminished 7th chords that are basically just 1 diminished 7th chord, but done in 2 different inversions. Now, how do we explain this? Does this work into the structure of a 2-5-1? It actually kind of does. So going back to the original version, the 5 chord would be an A dominant 7. Now, what a lot of jazz players like to do is they like to alter the dominant chord. So you can't mess with the core sound, the root, the major 3rd, and the minor 7th. But any other extension that you add into the dominant chord, theoretically, you can manipulate and create more tension. So let's see what happens if we add a flat 9th interval to an A7. And the fingering I'm going to do is also not going to contain the 5th interval. So it's going to be a root, major 3rd, minor 7, flat 9, which remember is also the same as the flat 2. If I added the fifth back in, but took out the A note as the root, this is what we're left with. That looks a lot like a fully diminished seventh chord, in this case a C sharp diminished seventh. So when you see an A7 flat 9 chord, you want to find the major third interval in there, in this case C sharp. And from there, you can play a C sharp diminished seventh chord, and it contains the same intervals and the same notes as the A7 flat 9. So that could be a good substitute for your 5 chord. So let's take a step back. Let's not do the diminished chord yet. And let's just see what we have so far. If I played the E minor 9 and then a regular A7 flat 9 in root position, resolving to the D major 7, which is what he does at the end of the phrase. All right, so there's some cool tension there, but he's also doing something else. He is going into a brighter register, a higher octave up here. Remember, this is all kind of coming from the original idea of an A7 flat 9, which is an altered dominant chord, but it's still the 5 chord in this key. The other thing he does, he moves that C sharp diminished seventh into another inversion of the same chord, in this case an A sharp diminished seventh. This is very useful when you're using diminished seventh chords, that all of the inversions are going to look the same finger-wise, as long as you separate them by minor third intervals. All right, so hopefully we understand this a little bit better now. This is still a 2-5-1 chord progression, but it's disguised with chord substitutions and altered dominant flavors. So this would be the most basic idea of what he's doing, like I showed in the earlier part of the lesson. This next version will now include the E minor 9 and the A7 flat 9. And this final version is the official version that he plays on the recording.